Today we're going to be talking to Ben Swann, a 14-year veteran of broadcast journalism and winner of 2 Emmys, as well as 2 Edward R. Morrow Awards. Ben has a website, benswann.com, and he's been making waves by reporting the news that the other members of the media are afraid to publish or are too lame to know what's going on. So we're going to get a chance today to talk to a guy that's pretty hip and pretty courageous in telling us what's really going on in the world. So my first question for you, Ben, is how has the American war on drugs affected people in the rest of the world?
When you look at what's happening in Mexico, Mexico is a very complicated situation. I covered the drug war there for a number of years, going into Mexico and seeing firsthand what was happening. One of the reasons the drug war is so important there is because it is such a massive industry in Mexico. Essentially, it is Mexico's middle class. The drug cartels gave Mexico a strong middle class. And some people will say, no, it came in the form of NAFTA and free trade. It's not true. In fact, if you look at what's happening in Mexico right now, all those jobs that went there and factories that went there through NAFTA have all left. And they've all gone to China and they've gone to India. The middle class remains. Well, it's because it's all a drug trade, middle class. The drug trade in Mexico is a very complicated situation in that you have different states, essentially, that are run by different cartels. And in 2006, when President Felipe Calderón came into power, his goal was to wipe out the cartels. But he wasn't really trying to wipe out cartels. He was attempting to help create, through the Mexican military, a super cartel. Now, some people say, hey, Calderón's a good guy, and he wasn't, really trying to do that. He didn't know what the military was doing. And that may be true. But there is no question that the Mexican military was fighting only one side in each of the different territories they went into and supporting the Sinaloa cartel. The war was a lot more difficult to fight than they thought it was going to be. So we saw this massive bloodshed, incredible violence taking over Mexico. But it wasn't about ending drugs. It was about consolidating power behind them. The U.S. government gets involved in that. There are guys who were a part of the Sinaloa cartel held in Chicago who testified in court that the U.S. was helping to provide intel on other cartels to the Sinaloa cartel in order to help them take out their competition. So our government, while fighting the war on drugs here, was, according to these cartel members who were on trial in Chicago, actually providing intel in order to help create a super cartel in Mexico as well.
Now, I think we all know the answer to this, but I want to ask you anyway because I think your answer will be informative and help us really understand what's going on. Does the war on drugs serve the will of the people?
Well, I don't think government serves the will of the people on any level, whether it's the DEA or the FBI or DHS or the IRS, whatever it is. But they don't see themselves in a role to really serve the American people either. It's interesting, though, because we've created this militarization of police in this country. And so one thing that has changed in the war on drugs is some of this legislation that's been created that says, if you enter someone's home as a police officer and they have drugs, even a small amount of drugs in that home, you can confiscate almost everything this person owns. And it becomes property of the state because they had drugs in their home. And we're seeing this happen more and more too, which is this very strange kind of evolution of drug law, which essentially says that the state has the right to everything you have if you're caught committing this crime. Which makes absolutely no sense at all. And yet it's happening all over America. And there are people who are literally having everything taken away from them because they're caught with drugs. So it's a policy that, again, doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, the change is happening so slowly. And there are a lot of people whose lives are being ruined over it right now. But we've created something in media where we essentially say, but those people are bad people because they're drug users. And so because they're bad people, don't have sympathy for them. Don't feel bad for them. If they lose their home or they lose all of their property, they shouldn't have been doing drugs. But at the same time, we protect the opium fields in Afghanistan with our soldiers. We pay off the drug lords in Afghanistan because that's part of our deal in order to prevent, insurgency from building up. And so we have government protecting drug lords in one country, providing intel to drug lords in another country and then locking up the people who use drugs in this country.
Well, Ben, do you see an end to the war on drugs?
I see an end to the war on drugs as we know it, but I don't think it'll be completely over. For instance, decriminalization of marijuana will come along in almost every single state. That will happen. What will not come with it is decriminalization of cocaine and heroin anytime soon. Even though, people like Governor Gary Johnson make really strong cases for why a lot of these drugs are they're used, and even worse drugs like people when they're using meth, and it has a much more severe reaction. The way that Governor Johnson explains it is that many of the problems that we see, and I don't want to quote him incorrectly, but it's something like 70% of all the problems associated with drugs are problems actually with prohibition of drugs, not with drugs themselves. And so we're not going to end that, because we'll still keep some drugs illegal because they're the really scary ones and they're the bad ones. We can't legalize those or decriminalize those. What I do see also happening, hopefully, is reform to the prison system and a lot of the justice system and how we deal with these things. But again, there's just so much money tied up in it.
Well, thanks for joining us for this wonderful and powerful interview with Ben Swann. This is Steve Kubby, Kubby TV, wishing you a great 420 day.
It's the proximity of what I hope to be, the weight so heavy where I stand.